When you travel to Western Europe and to the Emerald Isle, otherwise known as Ireland, if you never read anything about its history, you are probably expecting to find an island consisting of a single country with no divisions. However, that is not the case, as you will get to see once you start talking to the population as you arrive, or even find out by simply googling about it on the plane you're in. What you will find in Ireland is an island partitioned in two. One that covers most of the island is the Republic of Ireland, with its capital in Dublin and its population mainly Catholic. What is known as Northern Ireland is part of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, with its capital on the island next to Ireland, London. Its population mainly Protestant. Parts of the societies on both sides have resentment for one another, particularly present amongst the older population of Northern Ireland, when you consider how much chaos was caused in the 20th century due to IRA and loyalist paramilitary attacks. Such bitter resentment is unsurprising. On the other hand, however, the younger generations have started to care less about the bad blood between both sides and are pushing towards non-violent means, promoting reconciliation between both halves. The two sides are different on other scales as well. For example, you can be happily spending pounds in Belfast one day, but then the next moment you would have to change that to euros if you cross into the Republic of Ireland. So, what is the source of all of this? What can be put as the best explanation for what made the island of Ireland what it is today? Let's go on a journey. In the context of the English-Irish relations, the first disturbance to Ireland as an island came when the English army has landed and started capturing lands by Lachlan in 1168, where they captured what is today known as Leicester and Ulster by 1180, and by 1201 the English army has made its way westbound in the southern portion of the island. By 1220, Cork was captured by the English, and by 1227 they moved and took Connaught and the surrounding provinces of Connaught. Afterwards, there was a rather long time of peace between the English and the three dominant Irish kingdoms. By the 1320s, English King Edward II gave the region of Kildare to his Earl Fitzgerald, and even though Edward II died by 1327, his successor, Edward III, allowed Fitzgerald to keep his earldom and actually gave him more lands, along with creating a second earldom, the Earldom of Ormond, this time for another earl, known as Butlers. Meanwhile, Fitzgerald was granted a second earldom, Earldom of Desmond, which contained the southern provinces England had within Ireland and that were not already part of Earldom of Ormond. However, not everything continued as the English wanted. As in the north, Mac William Eochaidh attacked and took most of Ulster from the English, although the English forces were able to hold the southern part of Ulster, despite the success Mac William Eochaidh showed in his conquests. By 1394, Richard II of England established Barony of Westmeath under Nugent. Meanwhile, just a year later in 1395, Leinster was taken from the English by a new Irish kingdom, the Kingdom of Lothian, and afterwards, the situation of the island remained as it is. That changed by 1535 when King Henry VIII got rid of Earldom of Kildare, and that would only be the start of the changing times. Earldoms of Ordam and Desmond and Barony of Westmeath would follow suit and be fully reintegrated back to London's rule by 1542, while simultaneously England got most of Ireland under its control, in which by 1548 all that remains in Ireland are two separate Irish kingdoms, one by southwest and one by west. Meanwhile, England has the majority of Ireland under her control. In 1570 and 1580, just as Queen Elizabeth I is making her move against the western kingdom of Myuu Burghs, Earldom of Desmond launches two brief uprisings, where both are unsuccessful, but Queen Elizabeth is not in her attacks against Myuu Burghs, and by 1584, the only two powers remaining on Ireland are England and the southwest Irish kingdom of Domhnall. Afterwards of a brief uprising from Earldom of Desmond, Ulster Confederation and Kingdom of Lothian between 1593 and 1603, the start of the reign of James I in England would see the entire island of Ireland to be brought under complete and undisputed English control, where that would be the new status quo until 1641, the start of the English Civil War. 1641, as the English Civil War erupts, it spreads to Ireland as well, where, taking their chances now, the Irish rebels, and the Ireland finds itself divided into four sides. The biggest side in the civil war within the island is the Irish Catholic Confederation, which covers most of the island. Then we have the Covenant of Scotland by Northeast Ireland. Furthermore, we have English parliamentarians, who are in two separate pockets within Ireland and controls the southeast of England, along with the southern pocket of Cork and the northern pocket of Londonderry within Ireland. And last but not least, we have the English Royalists, who hold the eastern coastline of Ireland with Dublin and half of England within the northwest. Even though Ireland was split amongst the four factions, the front lines remained relatively stale for the majority of the civil war within the island of Ireland, although action did happen within England itself. The stale front lines within Ireland lasted around until 1646, as the last royalists were disintegrated at Stow on the World March, where, after the royalists were destroyed after the march in 1646, and the royalist uprising crushed in 1649, England Parliament's eyes turned towards Ireland, as the parliamentarian forces started their march from the parliamentarian-controlled Dublin towards north, Ulster, and towards the south, westward. By October 1649, the Covenant of Scotland in northeast of Ireland, along with the Irish royalists loyal to the English royalists, ceased to exist, as it is taken over by the English parliamentarians from the south and the north, uniting their front against Irish Catholic Confederation, where afterwards, in the 8 months, the parliamentarian army slowly take over Ireland, and by June of 1650, Irish Catholic Confederation collapses, where in its place comes English-controlled Ireland as a protectorate under Oliver. Oliver Cromwell was an absolute brute towards the Irish population during his reign would be an understatement. The impact of the war on Ireland and her people was severe, where it resulted in a famine, which was only worsened by an outbreak of the bubonic plague. Although there is no universal consensus on the damage done, historians estimate the drop in the Irish population resulting from the parliamentarian campaign anywhere between the range from 15 to 83%. Some estimates cover population losses over the course of the conquest period only, while others cover the period of the conquest to 1653 and the period of the Cromwellian settlement from August 1652 to 1659 together. Cromwell's reign would not last, as he would die in 1658, just 5 years, serving as Lord Protector. His son's reign as his successor would quickly end the year after from a lack of popular support. Parliament would soon after invite Charles II back from exile in 1660, where the newly restored monarchy would proceed to undo many of his reforms among the British Isles. The reforms undone would include the Commonwealth status of Ireland alongside the bans on theatre, drinking, and even Christmas. Although Cromwell's reign lasted just 5 years, it was a controversial one. The man is still remembered as a despised figure amongst the Irish people to this very day. 1687, there was a coup in England, where James II lost his throne to William during the bloodless coup. He fled to France in 1688, returned to Ireland in 1689 to flare up the Catholic rebellion to support his throne, and Derry was the last thing holding Ireland for the Protestant King William. Conflict broke out in Ireland, which lasted for 3 years, where the war is known as the Williamite War of Ireland, and its major event was the siege of which, after the first incident in Derry where 13 apprentices shut the gate down, thus staging an act of rebellion against English King James II, this promptly led to the conflict mentioned here. Even though in the grand scheme of things it might not sound like something major, it was, as the siege of Derry in 1689 led to the consolidation of Irish Protestants in the north, and not to forget that the Williamite War of Ireland also led to 1691 Act for the abrogating the oath of supremacy in Ireland and appointing other oaths, where it effectively barred all Catholics within the island, and in 1695 the penal laws were laid on with a flash of vengeance on Ireland, thus choking Catholics even harder. Now, up to this point, we have talked about what was going on in Ireland from the territorial and political aspects, but we are yet to cover its society. So, what happens? To answer this question, I will start by telling this point from 1556 to 1620, as it is an important part we must mention. Starting from 1556, England started to send Protestants to Ireland in the hopes of slowly converting the island from the Catholic stand to a Protestant one. And for this reason, England didn't just send some Protestant settlers to Ireland. They have slowly changed who owns the land, where before it would have been Irish Catholic people that owned the land, and therefore the people who were subject of their religious and national people. But as the settlers started to arrive, it became those very settlers who owned the land, who, these settlers, and now the new landlords, did not exactly have high opinion about their Catholic Irish subjects, in which this would play a disastrous role for a future event in this video. And what London hoped to achieve from this, besides a converted Ireland, was also the ability to crush rebellions against the English easier, as their new loyal Protestant Irish subjects would help them to do so. Or so that was what the English hoped for. This new system of replacing the landlords, spreading the Protestant religion, and sending Protestant settlers into Ireland failed within most of the island, although it was successful in the northern Irish province of Ulster, where some of the counties turned and became majority Protestant. And this would become another domino brick in the grand scheme of things, as the Catholic Irish people of Ireland would witness the slow transformation the English were causing on their island, by choking the Catholic Irish out of their jobs and the lands they might own as landlords, and as a replacement for these Catholics, Protestants were appointed, where these mainly English Protestant settlers would not be your first choice to go if you had an issue within the land you owned, as if your issue was having a beef with a Protestant, there was a very high chance your Protestant landlord would side with that person you had a beef with. And Irish people's discontent from their English overlords would start to boil, where all of what we have mentioned here, the new landlords, Protestant settlers, and the conversion attempts would all play their parts as time went by and events started to happen, events that had their origin points from these very boiling points. Throughout the 18th century, Irish cities were developed, but Dublin especially, where buildings such as Houses of Parliament built in 1739 and then rebuilt in 1787, the Customs House in 1791, and more. It is also during the late 18th century that the term United Irishmen came into existence, where, seeing the successes of the American and French revolutions, Irish revolutionaries such as Theobald Wolfe Tone, who is also known as the father of Irish republicanism, started to believe in the concept of republicanism, and came to the conclusion that a republic is exactly what the island needs, and with like-minded individuals, they founded the United Irishmen. This movement waited for 7 years, where, in 1798, they decided it was time, and started a rebellion in Ireland, but what they hoped for as an Irish victory turned out to be their own undoing, as Britain responded with force, crushing the United Irishmen movement in its infancy. After this one rebellion, Parliament within Dublin was moved outside of Ireland, where, with the Acts of Union in 1801, Ireland was now ruled directly from London, as the Kingdom of Great Britain became the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland. This would only add to the pain the Irish common people were feeling, especially if they were living in lands owned by Protestants, as many of those Protestant landlords moved out of Ireland and into London, leaving many of the Irish estates vacant, causing neglect and simply leaving the Catholic peasants to be as they continued to work in those neglected and now vacant estates. And although things looked bleak for the Catholic Irish, changes were happening as well, as Catholics started to get their rights back in 1829 with the Catholic Emancipation Act, where the emancipation was carried and championed by the Irish parliamentarian Daniel O'Connell, as he was one of the first Irish parliamentarians within the Parliament in London. And thanks to people like O'Connell, common Catholic Irishmen felt like something was being done, and still, the worst was yet to come, because as the 1840s and especially 1845 rolled around, Ireland would face one of the worst humanitarian crises the world was yet to see, when crop failure caused starvation. To say the Potato Famine of 1845 and how it was dealt with was merely a bad famine is an understatement. It was a chaotic catastrophe for Ireland, as due to the fact that the landowners no longer lived in Ireland but London, it meant almost every Irish estate suffered from the Potato Famine in the worst ways imaginable, as their statesmen and landlords that were meant to be there for their subjects were not there, and in actuality many of them never saw the famine as an emergency to be dealt with, as they did not live in Ireland anymore. So they had no idea how bad the situation was in reality. And when the government did act, it was too little, too late, as the famine caused so many to die and many more to flee for their lives to other countries. And the government didn't act out of the kindness of its heart, but rather because it saw the famine as an economic chance to exploit Ireland further. And this is exactly why the Potato Famine isn't just a famine, but a fiasco, a tragic disaster. Those that were devastated by the famine did not receive any help until either it was too late or those who were devastated fled. And those that were in power who were not devastated did not care until either it was too late or they simply saw the issue as an economic question and not a morality issue. And this would have consequences that could not be fixed. Consequences such as a generation of Irish people feeling resentment that was not felt by any one of the Irish generations that came before them. A resentment towards their Protestant landlords as they neglected their subjects in their darkest hours. Meanwhile, resentment towards London as London did not act accordingly and only acted in a limited way when it was too late. And this would have a butterfly effect on the future of the island. And the upcoming decades would show the effects of both this and the previous events on the island as they start taking shape as the world heads into the late 19th and then the 20th century. Thank you for watching. In the next video, we will discuss about the question of the Home Rule, Easter Rising, aftermath of the Rising and the War of Independence, and the Irish Civil War. Subscribing to this channel helps immensely. You can also help me out by becoming a Patreon. Sharing is also appreciated. So thank you. In this video, I would like to thank the Chilean artist Flying Tonk who made some incredible artwork for this video. You can find his Instagram in the description below. Next, I would like to thank Bloxer, an English friend of mine who has agreed to fact check this video script, as well as to see what I wrote and as a matter of fact, corrected the grammar on multiple occasions for a better flow. I would also like to thank Zeno, an Irish friend of mine who helped me write the script along with fact checking what is written by me. His help on this project is massive, as without his help on the script, this video may not have been made at all. And lastly, I would like to thank all of you who have watched this video. Your encouragement at the end of the Aegean video, along with pointing out where I was wrong or mistaken, is appreciated. If you didn't know, I have a Discord server, where you can join and continue the debate there. I hope to see you all soon with the next part.